It was supposed to be the most joyful day of Lydia Plath's life, a wedding surrounded by family, love, and blessings. Instead, whispers filled the air, suspicious glances cut across the ceremony, and the celebration quickly turned into a battlefield of hidden agendas and painful truths. What should have been about Lydia and Zach's commitment became yet another episode of control, judgment, and unresolved family fractures spilling into the open. Hi friends, my name is Christine, and welcome back to Inside Hollywood Couples. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts down below, because I really want to hear what you think about this wedding twist. Was Lydia being supported, or was she being silently torn apart by the very people meant to protect her? Now let's set the stage. For years, the Plath family has lived under the spotlight, and viewers have seen everything from their strict rules to their most painful fallouts. Season 7 has already been filled with drama, but Episode 9 brought something different. This wasn't just another family fight or awkward dinner conversation. This was Lydia's wedding day, the moment that should have been sacred, the moment that should have belonged to her. And yet, as the cameras rolled, it became clear that suspicion had entered the room long before Lydia walked down the aisle. From the very beginning, you could feel it. The smiles didn't fully reach their eyes, the laughter was strained, and under the surface, there were questions no one wanted to voice too loudly. Zach, the groom, should have been celebrated, welcomed, embraced. Instead, quiet doubts about his character and his future with Lydia cast a heavy shadow. And it wasn't just a passing concern. It became the unspoken storyline of the entire event. That's the heart of what we're going to talk about today. How love, faith, and trust clashed with suspicion, control, and even manipulation by both family members and producers. Because as shocking as it sounds, this wedding revealed far more about the Plaths than it did about Lydia and Zach's marriage. So stay with me, because what should have been the happiest day for Lydia became the most divided moment we've seen yet. To really understand why Lydia's wedding day felt so fragile, we have to step back and look at the bigger picture, because this wasn't just about two people exchanging vows. This moment carried the weight of years of family history, broken trust, and choices that have haunted the Plaths ever since the cameras first began following them. The Plath family's story has always been rooted in control. Kim and Barry raised their children in a world cut off from most of modern life. No mainstream music, no television, limited social interactions. The children grew up in a bubble of rules and expectations. For a long time, Lydia seemed to fit right into that mold. She was the daughter who didn't rebel, who stayed close to her faith, who kept the peace when everything else was falling apart. But if you've been watching closely, you know that loyalty came with a price. Think back to Ethan and Olivia's marriage. Their union became the first big test of whether a Plath child could build a life separate from the family's control. What should have been a normal transition into adulthood turned into years of tension, arguments, and painful distance. Ethan had to fight for the right to live on his own terms, while Olivia was often cast as the enemy simply for encouraging independence. Their struggles exposed the cracks in Kim and Barry's authority, and once those cracks formed, the entire family dynamic began to shift. Then came Kim and Barry's own divorce, a shocking unraveling of the very foundation that had been preached to the children. For years, they had been held up as the example of faith and unity, but suddenly even they couldn't keep their marriage together. That hypocrisy wasn't lost on the kids. It left many of them questioning what they'd been taught, and it gave others the courage to finally step away. Look at Mariah and Micah. Both chose freedom over obedience, carving out paths that shocked their parents but inspired fans. They cut their hair, wore what they wanted, moved away, chased careers, and experienced the world. Their rebellion wasn't just youthful experimentation, it was survival, a way to claim their own identities after years of being told who they were supposed to be. And then there's Lydia, who until now was seen as the reliable one, the daughter who stayed behind, who continued to live under her parents' guidance. She was portrayed as the safe bet, the one who wouldn't bring drama, who would carry on the traditions and keep the family's values intact. That's what made her wedding such a critical moment. This wasn't just Lydia saying, "I do." This was the Plath family putting their hopes, their fears, and their image into one single event. And when the whispers about Zach began, it struck right at the heart of that image. So by the time we reached the wedding day, it wasn't just a question of love. It was a question of whether the loyal daughter would finally get her happy ending, or whether she'd become yet another example of how control and suspicion always seem to win in this family. When the wedding day finally arrived, the scene should have been picture perfect. Lydia in her dress, Zach waiting at the altar, family gathered around to witness two young people commit their lives to each other. On the surface, it looked like every other ceremony we've seen on the show: the flowers, the smiles, the music softly playing. But if you paid attention, you could feel that something wasn't right. The energy in the room was heavy, and you could almost see the storm brewing behind the polite faces. The ceremony itself had all the rituals we expect: the walk down the aisle, the exchange of vows, the promises for a future together. Lydia's eyes were filled with emotion, and Zach tried to hold himself steady, but the whispers had already made their way into the air. For some family members, this wasn't just about celebrating the couple, it was about questioning the foundation of their relationship before it even began. And those doubts weren't whispered outside the cameras. They lingered right there, at the edges of the ceremony, captured in glances, subtle exchanges, and stiff smiles. The biggest cloud hanging over the day was the suspicion surrounding Zach himself. Questions about his sexuality weren't just rumors outside the show. They became part of the story inside the wedding episode. Instead of fully embracing him as Lydia's choice, some family members seemed to approach the ceremony as if they were attending with a checklist, looking for reasons to be concerned. It wasn't just a wedding, it was an examination, and Zach was on trial. And then came Veronica. In many ways, she became the lightning rod for everything simmering under the surface. She wasn't the bride, she wasn't the groom, but her presence and her words made the tension impossible to ignore. Whether she truly believed she was protecting Lydia, or whether she simply played into the role producers shaped for her, the result was the same. She added fuel to the fire. Her comments, her timing, and her demeanor gave the rest of the family permission to lean into their doubts, rather than silence them. What struck me most was how the ceremony, which should have been filled with joy, instead felt like two competing narratives running at once. On one hand, Lydia and Zach were declaring their love. On the other hand, members of her own family were questioning whether that love was real or safe. It created an emotional split screen. Vows at the front, suspicion in the background. And as Lydia said her promises, you couldn't help but wonder, was she hearing the words of her groom, or was she hearing the silent doubts hanging behind her? That's the tragedy of this moment. What should have been simple and sacred became complicated and divided. By the time they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, the question wasn't whether the wedding had been beautiful. It was whether the family had already planted seeds of destruction in the very foundation of their marriage. If the ceremony was tense, the reception was even more revealing. Normally, a reception is where the weight of the vows lifts, the bride and groom relax, the family celebrates, and the atmosphere shifts to laughter, food, and dancing. But Lydia's reception didn't quite hit that note. Instead, the tension seemed to follow everyone into the celebration, hanging in the air like an uninvited guest. At first, there were attempts at normalcy. Lydia and Zach cut the cake, posed for pictures, and shared their first dance. On the surface, these were the classic wedding traditions everyone expected. But if you looked closer, the smiles seemed forced, the conversations clipped, and the energy strangely divided. Half the room wanted to celebrate, while the other half couldn't let go of their doubts. It wasn't just a wedding party. It was a battlefield of whispers and side glances. And once again, Veronica played a central role in stirring the pot. While some guests tried to keep things light, she couldn't resist being awed, ringing up her concerns. Whether in hushed conversations at the tables or pointed comments delivered at just the wrong moments, she made sure no one forgot the cloud of suspicion hanging over Zach. Every time the energy seemed ready to tip toward joy, Veronica's words pulled it right back into unease. This created a ripple effect. Some family members began choosing sides in real time. You could see it in the seating, in who gravitated toward Lydia and Zach, and who stayed back, arms folded, lips pressed tight. Even the cameras captured it, the way certain siblings avoided eye contact, the way parents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, the way laughter felt muted compared to the heaviness in the room. The speeches only amplified the divide. Usually, wedding toasts are filled with humor, warmth, and well-wishes. But here, the undercurrent of doubt couldn't be ignored. Some speeches offered genuine support, trying to wrap Lydia and Zach in love, while others carried an edge of warning, subtle reminders that the marriage was being watched closely, almost as if to say, "We're here, but we don't fully approve." For Lydia, this was heartbreaking. This was the one day she had likely dreamed of since childhood, the day she thought would unite everyone around her happiness. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of a room split in two. It wasn't just about marrying Zach anymore. It was about proving to her family, and perhaps even to herself, that her choice was valid, her love was real, and her future was hers to define. But here's the painful truth. Once seeds of suspicion are planted, they don't just disappear after the party ends, they grow. And that's exactly what was happening in real time at Lydia's reception. What should have been a night of dancing, laughter, and unity, instead became the first chapter in a new family divide. By the end of the night, Lydia and Zach left as husband and wife, but they also carried with them the weight of knowing that not everyone in the room believed in their love, and that shadow is something no couple should have to walk into marriage with. In the days and weeks after the wedding, the fallout became impossible to ignore. What should have been a season of joy for Lydia and Zach instead turned into a storm of speculation, criticism, and emotional strain. The whispers that had haunted the ceremony and disrupted the reception didn't stay contained within the family walls. They spilled onto the internet, onto fan pages, and into conversations among viewers who couldn't stop debating what they had just witnessed. For Lydia, this was especially cruel. She had stepped into marriage hoping for support and unity, but instead, her love story became fuel for arguments about faith, identity, and family loyalty. Fans were divided. Some defended her right to choose her partner freely, while others echoed Veronica's concerns, amplifying the same doubts that had poisoned her big day. The line between family tension and public spectacle blurred completely, leaving Lydia trapped between her desire to protect her marriage and the weight of everyone else's opinions. This is where we see the real cost of reality television. For families like the Plaths, the cameras don't just document life, they reshape it. Producers know how to frame moments, how to spotlight conflict, and how to make whispers feel like thunder. In a way, Lydia's wedding was never just hers. It belonged to the audience, to the storyline, to the network that thrives on tension. What could have been a private struggle became a national conversation, stripping the couple of the intimacy they desperately needed. And yet, beyond the television drama, there's a much deeper theme at play here. The clash between tradition and independence. Lydia has always been seen as the faithful daughter, the one who followed the rules and carried the weight of her parents' values. But by choosing Zach, and standing by him even as doubts swirled, she began carving out a different path. It wasn't loud rebellion like Mariah's or bold independence like Micah's. It was quieter, but in some ways even braver. The decision to build a life on her own terms, no matter how uncomfortable that made the rest of her family. For Zach, the challenge is equally heavy. He's not just Lydia's husband now. He's the man under a microscope, judged for every word, every gesture, every look. Instead of being welcomed in, he's been placed on probation, and only time will tell whether the family chooses to embrace him or push him further away. The aftermath of this wedding isn't just about one couple. It's about what happens when love collides with expectation, when private vows are overshadowed by public opinion, and when a family already fractured by years of control finds itself divided once again. Lydia's wedding should have been a new beginning, but instead, it became a mirror reflecting all the unresolved wounds within the Plath family. And that leaves us with the haunting question: can love really survive when it's born in the middle of suspicion and control? Or will Lydia and Zach's marriage become yet another chapter in the Plaths' long, complicated story of broken trust? And that brings us to the end of Lydia's wedding saga, a day that should have been nothing but joy, but instead became one of the most divisive chapters in the Plath family's story. What was meant to be a fairy tale moment turned into a battleground of faith, family loyalty, suspicion, and control. For me, the most heartbreaking part is how little room Lydia was given to simply be a bride. Instead of unconditional support, she had to navigate whispers about her husband, sideways glances at her reception, and speeches laced with doubt. Her vows were spoken under a cloud, and that's something no one deserves on their wedding day. But here's the bigger picture. This isn't just a story about Lydia and Zach. It's about the price of growing up in a world where control and image matter more than love and individuality. It's about what happens when reality TV amplifies every family fracture and turns private doubts into public spectacle. And it's about whether true love can survive when it's constantly questioned, not only by strangers online, but by the very people who are supposed to offer unconditional support. So I want to hear from you. Do you think Lydia and Zach can overcome the weight of suspicion and build a lasting marriage? Or do you believe the seeds planted on their wedding day will grow into bigger problems down the road? Whose side are you on? Lydia and Zach's or Veronica's? I'm Christine, and this has been Inside Hollywood Couples. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update on the stories that matter most. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. Because at the end of the day, these aren't just reality TV moments. They're lessons about love, control, and the fight for independence. And that's where Lydia's wedding leaves us. Not as a joyful celebration, but as a moment split by suspicion, control, and reality TV's hunger for drama. What should have been her happiest day became a reminder of how fragile love feels under family pressure. I'm Christine, and this is Inside Hollywood Couples. If you felt the tension of this episode, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Do you think Lydia and Zach can survive the weight of these doubts? I'll be watching your thoughts, because this story is far from over.